Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going beyond basic movie criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole, and with me today is
Adam,
Garret,
Justin,
and Lexy.
Lexy. What movie are we overanalyzing this week?
We're talking about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice.
So I think this trend of the very late installment sequel is something worth talking about in terms of what's going on in the culture that these movies are getting made and how they land. I think is an important topic, number one. But I also just like from a movie perspective, Adam and I did Babylon, and we were talking about, what makes an auteur, like what makes a great director. And I was like, I couldn't pick a Damien Chazelle movie out of a lineup. Like he has no voice. And Tim Burton is someone who has such a voice. Like he's just such a distinctive look and style. And I think that I think this movie in particular really changed the landscape of film, like, or the original Beetlejuice. Like I mean, I wouldn't quite give it the impact 10, but boy, like nothing was the same after this movie came out. Like I said, at the time, it was just so utterly unconventional. And his mark on the film world and film world aesthetic is undeniable. And I think it's really sort of interesting to think about how he lost it and what was in this attempt to regain it.
but do you think it was his idea to want to regain this? Like, I don't feel like he's the one pushing for a sequel here. I feel like this is like, people have asked for a sequel to Beetlejuice for years online. And like, this is the fandom being like, we need more, because this was such a revolutionary film. Problem with trying to create a revolutionary film is you can't, because it was already revolutionary the first time. Like, you're not going to reinvent the wheel with the same movie. And I don't know if it didn't feel like to me his heart was in it when he did this, like of some of his like grittier kind of like original work.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. Now that I've had a little time to digest that, Garret, that you did get the vibe that Burton may have been kind of mailing it in, and which is why for me the saving grace were the performances from some of the actors and actresses like that made it made this a fun movie. Which, all right, during Halloween season, you can throw this on, and it's good for that.
I think it operated kind of like something where, like, yeah, initially maybe it's not like the thing he wants to do, but I think the energy was there. It didn't seem phoned in terms of like, I don't care about this at all. It was more like, well, I'm doing this and I'm going to do like I'm going to try. I'm going to do a good job. There's going to be, like cool stuff, and or you get like a really great energy out of like Michael Keaton and everybody else in the movie. They're just like the other elements just weren't there to begin with, I think. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like the heart not being in it seems accurate, but it didn't seem like phoned into me. It didn't ring as hollow as like, like to Nicole's point, like these movies, like not just stuff that's like super, like a super big time gap, but like just the endless sequels that we get. Like I was looking at the movies I've seen in theaters this year, and almost all of them are like their properties. And there is like a big difference in something like this, where it's like it seems like the people involved care, and then there's like just other stuff where like you can tell where it's like they think you're gonna like eat it up, and they don't need to try. Like this didn't seem like something where it was like, oh, we could just put out whatever Beetlejuice product. No one, they'll watch it no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know as much about Tim Burton specifically, but the question was kind of made me thinking about like what we want and what we say we want, and then what kind of comes out, in the end, and how like there are not a lot of movies where the sequel passes the original. There are definitely some notable examples like Shrek 2. I think Shrek 2 is the elite Shrek.
Can I just like clarify that though? Like there's like a sequel and then there's like whatever this is. You know what I mean? Like there's the like Terminator, Terminator 2, Terminator 2 is the best. That's like they came out within each other. Like this is like we need another term for this.
A legacy sequel, but it's not quite.
Yes, something
Okay.
like a late breaking sequel. I don't know, but keep
I
going.
like Legacy because it's exactly what it's supposed to do. It captures the history and the nostalgia and gives it its due and little nod to say, hey, this happened. Also, here's the story, little epilogue, legacy epilogue.
As a
There we go.
like an aside though, for me, like a legacy sequel is something like Halloween from 2018, where there's like a bunch of crummy ones
Yeah.
that I love in between, and this one's like we're gonna pretend they don't exist, and we're making like we're bringing back main characters in a genre where that never happens, and so like I think there's an implied there's other movies to something like a legacy sequel.
Yeah, and that one's like almost a reboot in some ways, but yeah, I was thinking like, especially thinking about like what brings people to the theaters. I think, there's kind of been different reactions of, like Inside Out 2, I think brought tons of crowds back or into the box office. And I think part of that is because, well, one, people love Inside Out, and that also came out like 10 years after the original one. And I kind of am wondering, as long as as long as the movie meets like a certain threshold, then people will like go out to see it and like want it, because like creating another, like wanting a sequel to create another like influential movie, like I feel like that's hard to get, because yeah, the first one, unless you like really do something crazy with it, which most studios are not going to do, but then people will still come out as long as it meets sort of a minimum threshold where it's not god awful.
So you mean threshold of quality? I wasn't sure what you meant by threshold. Threshold of quality, you're saying?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Like I think if this movie was truly atrocious, I think probably more people, maybe it would have gotten some bump, but I think probably more people would have skipped it. And so even if it's not the creme of the crop, as long as it meets a certain threshold of quality, it's going to bring people to the theater, which is what the studios want. And then there's this whole, thing that we've talked about before about IPs and non-original content, etc.
Sort of like Twister and Twisters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
perfect example.
That's true. Yeah.
yeah. Which, I mean, they were fine. It didn't blow me away, but like I didn't think they were
Ah.
terrible.
Didn't blow you away.
I
It's going to be the punniest episode of Movies That Matter ever.
The real whirlwind.
But yeah, so I want to go back to a couple of things. So I read, you all know I love Dana Stevens from Slate. Like I read her review of it, and she brought up what you did, Garrett, about like feeling like a lot of his mid-career movies, like his heart just wasn't in the IP, and that's why they weren't good movies. And I was like, I can see that. And I'm siding towards Adam on this one. I do think his heart was in it. Like, again, all of the crazy effects, all of the things he loves. Like, it wasn't well written, and that is, as the director, he's responsible for all of it. But the art direction, the costumes, the effects, the makeup, like all of that worked really well. And I did feel like he was having fun revisiting this world. So, but I do think like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that any artist is really capable of like reinventing themselves in that same way again, right? Like, how do you make Beetlejuice? How do you come out with just like totally revolutionary way of looking at film, and then you have to become a parody of yourself? I don't know.
I guess it begs the question, can you reinvent yourself as something else if you've already been like, if Tim Burton tried to make like a serious drama movie, no one would want it.
I think it's like a case like the big studios got him too with like Batman. The first one I think is even more influential than Beetlejuice in terms of like the way the box office worked, like merchandising. Like it's just like Jack Nicholson in that movie. Like it's still the most lucrative deal an actor has ever signed, I think, in terms of like merchandise percentage and like box office bumps. And it's like, well, he never really had it. Like someone who I constantly associate with Tim Burton is Wes Anderson, where it's like they both have these very, very distinct styles, But like you could make the argument, and I think Wes Anderson's like later like Asteroid City is one of the worst films I've ever seen. But like he never like really sold out, I guess is the term I hate to use. But like they never like, he never really like left his lane. Whereas like Tim Burton, like I feel like profit was kind of like a motivation behind all his movies after Batman. When you think about it, like they were all big studio pictures. They were all like with this sort of eye of like a summer draw. He's like almost like James Cameron in that way, which is weird to think about. Where it's like the director is like kind of the draw here. He's like a brand. And like what like are you ever able to make another movie like even like I'm not a big Edward Scissorhands fan, but I think that's like another really like original movie of his. And it's like after a certain point, you just can't make that stuff anymore.
I'm dead and Adam is fired.
I went out with a bang.
Oh, knife to the scissor to the heart.
Well, it's funny that you say James Cameron, because when we were talking about like reinventing or like crazy or like reinventing yourself and creating a standout movie, I was thinking of like James Cameron Avatar, where like the big thing was that it was like some of the newer technology of its time, and like people were just amazed by how much of it was computer and like all that. And like I think part of now that we've have so much film history, I wonder, is just like pushing the technology even further and further.
But I think all the points kind of bring us to a central theme that we've been talking about. Are we as consumers able to push past nostalgia to allow someone to make a new name for themselves and reinvent themselves? Or are we driving their force to say we have to have the same thing because we need the nostalgia, we need to hang on? And what is the call for so many people, I would say, in Gen X and millennial generation who are like, yeah, we really want this nostalgia. We want to keep remaking these long-lasting sequels. They probably would have gotten a sequel back in the day. Why didn't we do it then? But like, instead of kind of just sitting down and being like, our nostalgia grab isn't as sacred and saved as everybody else's. What about us is not able to be satisfied with what we were given? Or is it just that every movie now has to get a sequel and that's what just the consumers are used to?
It might be a bit of the latter. But the point about nostalgia drive things almost it rarely, I think, turns out as well as the original. I mean, you could just look at the Disney Star Wars films. Like whatever you think about the prequels Lucas did, they at least had a coherent vision and storyline. But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue it's not demand driven, it's supply driven. I don't think all of us are crying out for all of these sequels. I think the studios are too afraid to make new IP. And so they're giving it to us. And so we're like, well, there's nothing else to see. I'll go see the new Beetlejuice movie. Like, I don't think it's demand driven. I think it's supply driven entirely.
I don't know if I think it's totally supply driven. I think it's probably a mix of demand.
Don't go adding nuance to this conversation.
Nuance is dead. No, I'm just kidding. That I imagine it's probably there's the success of Marvel, the the general success of IPs, like bringing in people, and so people come in, they continue to see that IPs will generally bring in people, and then there's kind of a circular pattern, and you get the occasional more indie or less or non-IP breakout hit, but probably if we were to do a correlation, the IPs are generally still bringing in more tickets than some of the smaller non-IP films. And that's what they care about is the money. Like some people like Wes Anderson, are maybe more on their own and art driven, but not everyone can be on their own like other directors. And so they also have to be with the studios to make content.
He also is IP at this point.
Yeah, well, that's another argument as well.
It's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing at this point. Like we've come so far, right? This has been kind of building and building. Where you have like something like to me like Deadpool this summer, where it's like the IPest movie ever made. right? And like it's maybe where do we go from there? Like that seemed to me like the red busting out of the thermometer level of IP. Like there's nowhere like it's annihilated the landscape of blockbuster filmmaking the way we know it, and hopefully things will change.
Well, I mean,
You get a cameo. You get a cameo. Sorry.
The two biggest, movies of last year were Barbie and Oppenheimer, right? Like they weren't IP movies. So there is
Not yet.
well, yeah. I mean, what's the sequel to Oppenheimer?
Godzilla -1.
Well, and the point about the IPs that with like Barbie and Oppenheimer, like to Adam's point of like Wes Anderson is kind of an IP, directors Tim Burton is kind of an IP, and that
Nolan is
what?
Nolan is definitely IP.
Right, and like Nolan is one of the biggest directors, and then Greta Gerwig is also now one of the biggest directors, and so it's almost like if it's not officially IP that the studio, I feel like the studios think there has to be also a big director behind it sometimes, because then you start to get into a parallel conversation of taking a chance on new actors versus doing established actors, and I'm sure the studios are all doing this sort of risk analysis of what's gonna make the return and stuff like that, and then maybe of unexpected things like I think more in horror with like X and Pearl and then Maxine, like there was definitely nostalgia elements, especially in Maxine with like the 80s stuff, but that was kind of, and then also the ode to like slasher films, but you have kind of a more unknown person and unknown story like coming to the forefront. But unfortunately a lot of movies get made or I think what tends to get a lot of people in seats in general is big actors, big names, big movies.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a thing as a box office draw, right? I think that yeah. So like an indie movie is like unknown director, unknown stars, like new property, right? Like everything was totally new, and so because you don't have the studio money to hire like a big name actor, although sometimes you can get them to do it at scale just because they believe in the project, right? So I think that the thread of studios want some kind of guarantee, right, of butts and seats, be it the director, be it the star, be it the IP. But to me, I guess the IP issue is that you can keep reinventing it in all kinds of different ways, add new people, swap out actors, whatever, because it's like it's still Batman. That's the constancy, not Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I think I agree in that. Even in the newer Star Wars, we got Daisy Ridley. I think John Boyega had done some other stuff before that, but then I'm sure Star Wars propelled him in some way. Yeah, Attack the Block. And Fudge, who's the other guy?
Oscar Isaac.
Yes, Oscar Isaac. That's who I was thinking of. Like I started seeing him a lot more afterwards. So yeah, I think there can be opportunities to bring in new people even within existing IPs, and then I think thinking back to my earlier point, you just have to make sure it's meeting a certain threshold of quality so that people just don't throw it in the bin.
Yeah, because you're right. It will out if it's bad. Like nothing is like no bad movie is immune. Like you'd see with like Marvel's, like people had the knives out for like their newest stuff, which wasn't good, but like all like the pieces about the death of Marvel. It's like, well, maybe the movies need to be like somewhat good. And to the other point, Nicole, it's like I don't think necessarily that people are IP. I do believe that every studio executive sitting down in America right now does think that.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, but then to your point though, then you have the Black Panther, and we all know I hate Marvel. Black Panther is a great movie, right? Like it's just a good movie, and they took an indie director, they gave him the budget, and he made something terrific. So there is room for there is room for that in this system, but it's rare. but I was going to say too, and I think like, you know, we, for the IP and this nostalgia and the elder millennial Gen X, who this market is catering to, right? Um, you know, you think about how stressful our lives are, how difficult an economy we are dealing with, how many people feel that they will never be able to afford a house. I think that I mean, I do think the sequels are a reflection of the times of the nostalgia craving, of the craving of comfort, the craving of when we were children and things were easier, and also the craving of like maybe watching someone's evolution, like someone's growing up, someone's fast forward, where like things have worked out, or that they're still able to overcome a conflict, right? I think that actually is part of it. I think we might be more open to other things if everything else just didn't feel so crappy.
I want to push back down a little bit because there's been lots of studies about Gen X and millennials on nostalgia, and like why
Fair
they
enough.
want to watch the same show over and over and over again. Like they pick a feel good and they stick with it. Um, versus Gen Z and Gen Alpha are like, show me something new, show me something I haven't seen before. And we got to remember, a lot of these kids have never even seen Beetlejuice 1. So I'm wondering if they're walking into this getting the same kind of, oh my God, that was weird, kooky, crazy, Tim Burton original feeling when they see it. I don't know because I don't talk to a lot of kids outside of work. But I'm wondering if like we are our own problem in a critic cycle, right? Like we want nostalgia, we criticize it, we don't like it, we ask for something else. Okay, give me. We even did it here. Like, give me. Okay, I only want a movie that's good IP, but how do you know it's good if you don't put out the bad too? And so I'm wondering if this whole idea of like being stuck on we find comfort in the things that are familiar to us. And you're right, Nicole, a lot of it is based in trauma, right? Like historical trauma, not necessarily personal trauma, which is kind of all in the same at this point in life.
I mean, is it the trauma of Atreyu losing his horse to nothing? Because also, like, those Gen X early movies were pretty traumatic.
But I did like when I'll show like movies in therapy to stuff and kids are like, oh my God, this is awful. Why is it so grainy? Where are the special effects? Where is the CGI? I'm like, you hold your horses, no pun intended. And just understand that there is salience to those things. But like I feel the same way about if somebody tries to make me watch an all black and white film from like the 20s or 30s, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? This is awful. So are we holding on to our nostalgia? Or are we just holding on to like we're the generations where everything has changed? We've been through every level of technology. We've been through every level of systematic. Is it nostalgia that we're holding on to, or is it the fact that everything else has changed, so we don't know what to do with the pieces of our past and how to rectify them with our future? And so we just keep seeing, okay, more of the same thing. Please keep it alive because it may be a like stubborn and unwillingness for us to go into the future and say, what does movies have to offer for us now? What can we see? Where is it going? And can I accept that and understand that I like that as a style?
I
I don't
think
know.
the unpredictability is definitely a factor. Speaking for myself, when I get into those modes of
As the only
like,
non-Gen X elder millennial of the group.
that's true. I
I'm
am
a
No,
definitely a
good.
young
Let's hear it.
millennial, but
I'm not an elder millennial.
I am.
but like when I think about like what I want to put on, it's like, okay, what do I feel like right now? And then it's like, well, I feel maybe like this, but I don't know if I can expect that because I've never seen it before. Let me go for what I feel like that I know will feel like this that I've seen before.
Yeah.
So what you said resonated with me. So I wanted to share
Yeah, it's the familiarity that we want, not necessarily the nostalgia. It's the I can predict, I can understand. This is how I remember and recall. We have one of the greatest like emotional attachments to memory recall of any generations. And it's because we had to go through a cycle of where everything went from a print to a digital age. So we are all about like, oh, we will condense, we will take physical things and make them into electronic copies versus the generations before us only had physical copies. So like they kept every picture because they wanted to be like, oh my God, I could only take 24 pictures in a roll at your birthday. I want to make sure I had everything, you know what I mean? And now they're like, oh, I take 1,700 selfies a day and I'll upload them to the cloud and they'll just be there forever.
Garrett, that statement made me feel so lucky to be a part of what you just described, because it's the best of both worlds.
It is. That's also why we get stuck in these parallels, because we have seen the transition.
But
And
to
we're-
your point, Garrett, if you're our parents' age, if you're my parents' age, you had no ability to rewatch anything. If you lived before VCRs were invented, right?
Well, my
Like
dad,
maybe there would be a retrospective and they're replaying Gone with the Wind, but like you would actually not, you have no ability on demand to go back and rewatch something that you love. You just hope it would be on TV or something, right?
But films they were in theaters a lot longer back then too.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying, like, actually, that's a really good point. Like, I'm just thinking, like, so for me, I don't want a Beetlejuice 2. I like Beetlejuice. Let's just rewatch the original. Like, I don't need. This doesn't fill any sort of gap for me. But that's just me. But I do think like, but I do still real like to Lexi's point. Half the time when I'm scrolling through a streaming service and it's like all this crap and I don't know what to pick, like I'll just rewatch something that I know I like. And there have been studies that that's what people are doing. But I'm like, but if you're my mom, like in the 60s, how it's gone forever. Like there's no way to like rewatch something that she likes. So we're kind of the first generation who even has that as an option.
that's why it used to be so expensive to buy this stuff. I mean, it still kind of is, but like I remember what like like VHS tapes being like $35 new.
$100 new. You
is-
had to get them from Blockbuster at first.
But like no one will know the thrill of going to that rental place on a Friday night and seeing like, oh, you couldn't afford the brand new movie that came out because like one, it was either gone, everybody had taken it, or it was like $7 more just to rent that one. So you would scroll through the movies and you had to read the back of the box and you had to be like, oh my gosh, is this gonna be good? And like you had to convince your parents like, okay, this one's in the dollar section, so can I get two if I like really like, take some of the older movies? And I remember when like ABC started their family movie night back in the early 90s, where they would every Saturday play a movie that the family could all watch together. Things that were classics, things that were action, adventure, like they had a lot of like range, but it was like that was a crazy idea back then for them to like show things that were older. You couldn't buy anymore, you couldn't rent, and the things were just starting to come out on VHS and hard quality, and then DVD really at the the 90s. But I remember my first DVD being Lord of the Rings. And, the only reason we all know what we were getting for Christmas under the tree is because in our stockings, each of us got a different DVD. Like, it was like that. You don't get that excitement anymore because now kids are like, oh, I'll just pop on streaming and binge watch the entire
on
thing.
my phone.
Yeah. And like, oh, yeah, I saw that it wasn't funny. It didn't keep my attention. And you're like, it didn't keep your attention because it's a 3-hour movie that was wonderful. You have no attention span. So this idea that we're stuck in nostalgia, or are we stuck in a rut where if we start to give up and move towards the future, does it mean we actually have to give up on good movies? Quality over quantity. And now we feel terrible.
I was thinking I want to bring the nuance again and say it's both because life is also hard.
I do also think that, to your point earlier, Garrett, that there's a fair amount of people who are parents who are excited to introduce their kids to some of this stuff. So I think that's probably a factor as well.
Yeah, to sharing that like joy for the first time of watching Beetlejuice. There was a couple kids in the audience, clearly, hopefully with their parents. But like an older generation wanted to pass on something that was important to them because Tim Burton's original Beetlejuice was so revolutionary and iconic for its time. So how do you replicate that with a generation that may not understand it? And you're like, oh my God, but look at the gags. Oh, the CGI is not super great, but like, look at the physical prop gags. Like, these are fantastic. Look at this makeup. And they're like, okay, I've seen better clothes on Wednesday Addams that he's directed. Like, and you're like, okay, but yes, but this is the original. This is where he started. And now look, he is still in your shows. He's still making content for you. Like Wednesday Addams is wildly popular. He directed, I think, 4 of those episodes. And people are just like, wow. But they have I mean, kids want more horror, more scare, more gritty, grueling now. And you're like, I kind of just want to stay at the level of Beetlejuice some days and just be like, that's good enough for me. Like, that was Sandy the Worm was terrifying when I was, in college and I was an adult. So, I don't know. It makes me feel old, but also lucky that we got to experience what we did. It's nuanced, as Lexi would say.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I will turn it to the group. Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice?
Going to Beetlejuice.
Good job. All right. So, social impact score. I mean, the movie is doing really well.
Yeah, making money. That's for sure.
So it means we'll get a bunch of other old sequels.
All right. Going in reverse order from last time, putting Lexi on the spot, what would you give this as a social impact score and why?
I would give it a 5. You know, fun movie, as we discussed. Storyline, not the best or most well thought out, but still fun. And then also with impact, doing well, but probably not as much impact as the first one.
Justin?
5 as well, and similar to what Lexi said, definitely not as impactful as the first one. First one would have been probably like a 9 or 10 as far as impact, but this one, yeah, it's a 5. But I do know a lot of people in my age cohort though were very excited to see this movie. So there's and the box office reflects that there's interest in it. So I think it's tapping into something that people do want to see. They want something in this vein. So it's good to get that. And this could be introduced to a younger generation of people with that. So I'd say a 5.
Garret?
I'm gonna give it a 4. Some of the reasons I've said, wasn't the overall best movie I've ever seen. I did love it for just the laughs. Like, it was a nice movie to go see. Like I said, it was cute. Go see it, go enjoy, have a good time. I don't think they could have. I thought they could have pushed the envelope a little further with talking about some of maybe the social issues about like death and grief. That was the whole focus of the movie, and we kind of didn't even really mention grief or death really hardly as a way to cope. So I'm gonna give it a 4, and it was probably a 3, but that rendition of Deo definitely moves it to a 4 because that is excellent.
Adam?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it in line with everybody else. I'd say like a middle of the road 5. I think if it gets people watching some of Tim Burton's older stuff, thinking about kind of the sort of like at this point 35 years of impact he's had on what movies are like, how merchandise is like, for good or for bad, obviously. Is a really like it continues to be a really interesting thing to me. Like, and I thought the movie did have stuff to say as well. It was the kind of hidden, which I liked. I prefer it understated rather than like see what we're doing in this like new thing. I think I agree with, not to like totally digress, but Garret, what you said is true. I think it's like it would have been nice to see it engage a little bit more with some of like the issues with that character. But I also think that it would have been probably more annoying if it had done that too much and not as much fun. And I think that's important now too. Nuance, to use the word of the night. So yeah, you know what? I'll buck the trend. I'm going to give it a 6.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think I might have liked this movie the least, and I feel like I want to give it like a very optimistic 7.
Wow.
For what so again, optimistic, pie in the sky. Maybe this will never come true. That's the difficulty of giving these scores. But what the movie did well, and the return to form of the movie, I just want to believe will catch on. So I am thrilled at the idea of movie makeup, practical effects like coming back into style because of how well this movie did. I would love for that to be that, like, this movie really didn't rely on CGI, and now people are like, oh, maybe we don't need it. Maybe we can go back to, reinvent some of the older forms. Like, I would love for that to be what this movie brought us, because I think it's just overdue.
Throw another thing on top of that, Nicole, was
Yeah.
the older people leading a movie.
Hmm.
I saw this movie on Michael Keaton's 73rd birthday. Then you have Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara. Let's throw Defoe and Monica Bellucci in there. Just like, kind of like over 45 people leading a movie is awesome.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting, because I was just about to say that as well. And I think, like, one of the things that I love about, I mean, like, look at what has happened to Catherine O'Hara. Fantastic. Couldn't think of anyone who deserves this way late in her career renaissance than freaking Catherine O'Hara, who has been drop dead funny since that first Beetlejuice. Like, she's amazing. And all of a sudden, she's like a household name, and it's absolutely stunning and terrific to see. And Michael Keaton was absolutely like the it boy of the 80s, kind of faded out and is coming back. And it's really, there are a lot of complaints about the aging of movie stars, but it is wonderful to see people who have been maybe a little more below the radar, like Winona Ryder, like Catherine O'Hara, and like Michael Keaton, kind of coming back in this way and leading a movie. It's fabulous, and I love it. All right, Adam, recommendation.
I am watching for the first time Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's great. A huge fan of the movies growing up, but I never watched a single Star Trek show. And it's great.
How did you get on this podcast?
I highly recommend going and see the musical Beetlejuice. It's a fun take. It's sassy. It's fun. The music is really good. And it's just a fun kind of, if you really are digging for that nostalgia from the first movie, the play really does good job of poking fun of itself, but also bringing back that nostalgia.
So,
Justin?
slightly in a Beetlejuice vein. This is something that's a little darker, but still kind of the horror vein, and also lots of social commentary. It's the show Evil. I just got into
that. We have to talk about this later.
Yes, fantastic. It's on streaming on Paramount Plus, and also I believe it just got on Netflix as well. But the fourth season just
Stacey's working way through season 1. I made her watch it too.
Yes.
Sorry, keep going.
It just concluded the 4th season. I know people are hoping there's a 5th. They could do it, but it's a fantastic show. Lots of commentary on both like race, religion, gender, ethnicity. It's a very good show.
I will recommend, speaking of comfort things, well, at least for me, is I love Rhett and Link on YouTube, who do Good Mythical Morning. And they're doing their own, like, I'm not really sure what to call it, but they're doing their own show on their main YouTube channel, which is called Rhett and Link. It's called Wonderhole. And it's just kind of a series of episodes that I think is them doing what they do best, which is a combination of like both scripted and unscripted comedy, kind of weird, surreal situations that they get themselves into, and also some fun comedic music. Like the first episode is them kind of recreating those like YouTuber videos where they go on the really expensive plane rides and they're showing like, look at all this stuff I have. They like recreate that, and then it devolves into something related but kind of insane. So it's on their YouTube channel, just called Rhett and Link Wonderhole. That's my recommendation.
I'm going to recommend the book The Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope. It's so fun, especially as DC resident. It's set in the 30s. It's got a little supernatural element, but they are in the U Street, Shaw area. They go to a movie at the Lincoln Theater. Like, if you know DC, all of these landmarks are in the book. It's really fun, and it's a good read aside from that. But as a DC resident, it was really fun to take a look back at old DC and the neighborhoods that we're all so familiar with. All right. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We've got a great fall season ahead for you. So check us out. We are still at moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. We've got a Facebook page. You can email us at moviesmatterpod@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Stay tuned. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.